The sky above New York darkened as enormous shadows cast by alien motherships blotted out the sun. From every corner of the city, the noise of panic and chaos filled the streets as people looked up in disbelief. It was a sight straight out of a disaster movie, only this time, it was real. The Zorgans had arrived. They were a powerful alien empire, and they had chosen Earth as their next conquest. To them, Earth was an easy target, a backwater planet with primitive technology and fragile inhabitants. What could possibly stop them? Down below, three friends, Sarah, Tom, and Mike, sat outside their usual coffee shop. While the world around them descended into chaos, they calmly sipped their overpriced lattes, watching the motherships hover ominously above. "Of course," Sarah said with a dry laugh, setting her cup down. "Just another Tuesday in NYC. Aliens one day, subway delays the next." Mike shook his head, biting into his muffin. "I was hoping for a quiet week, honestly. But here we are again, aliens trying to conquer the Earth." "Yawn." Tom leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Remember the Barans? Couldn't even handle our spicy food. I bet these guys won't last long either." The ground trembled as a bright beam of light shot down from the nearest ship, right in the middle of Times Square. A squad of Zorgan soldiers materialized from the beam, towering and menacing. They were everything the movies had promised: hulking, muscular beings covered in armor, with menacing weapons that glowed ominously. The crowd scattered, screaming, as the invaders began to march forward. Sarah, Tom, and Mike watched the scene unfold without so much as flinching. Tom stirred his coffee, unimpressed. "Well, here we go. You think they practiced that entrance? Very dramatic. Maybe we should worry, at least a little," Mike asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't actually that concerned. He was already pulling out his phone to record. The Zorgans moved forward in perfect formation, their leader stepping out in front. He towered over the crowd, eyes glowing a dangerous red, weapons at the ready. Everything about them screamed that Earth didn't stand a chance. But then something strange happened. They weren't moving as quickly or as smoothly as they should have been. There was a hesitation in their steps, a slight wobble. The leader raised his arm to gesture toward the humans, and then, without warning, stumbled. His armored body hit the pavement with a loud thud, and for a moment, everything stopped. Sarah blinked. "Did he just fall?" The Zorgan commander groaned, struggling to lift himself. Around him, the other soldiers were starting to wobble too, their movements unsteady, like they were walking on ice. They tried to lift their weapons, but their arms moved sluggishly, and soon enough, several more of them lost their balance and collapsed to the ground. The mighty invaders, defeated by gravity. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Mike muttered, still recording. Laughter began to ripple through the crowd as the once feared Zorgan warriors floundered, barely able to stand. Their bodies, tall and imposing, were suddenly too fragile for Earth's gravity. It was as if the planet itself was fighting back. These highly advanced aliens, who had mastered space travel and wielded advanced technology, hadn't considered one crucial detail: Earth's gravity was far stronger than anything they had ever experienced. The leader of the squad grunted as he attempted to rise again, only to be pushed down by the weight of his own armor. Sarah couldn't help but let out a snicker. "You'd think they'd do their research before deciding to invade." Tom leaned forward, grinning. "Maybe someone should tell them that our gravity's a little heavier than their brochures suggested." The streets, once filled with panic, were now filled with amusement. A few daring tourists even took out their phones to snap selfies with the struggling aliens in the background. The Zorgans, once the epitome of fear, were now a spectacle, helpless against the simple force of gravity. They really thought they had this in the bag. Mike laughed, shaking his head. "Imagine coming all this way, planning an invasion, and then getting taken down by standing." The narrator's voice broke the humor, the tone more serious. These weren't just small errors. This was a catastrophe for the Zorgan Empire. They had prepared for every possible defense Earth might have thrown at them: missiles, nuclear weapons, even biological warfare, but they had never considered gravity. It was as if the very ground beneath their feet had conspired against them. The once mighty Zorgan soldiers were now crawling, their limbs unable to support their weight. The humans watched in stunned silence at first, but as the reality of the situation sunk in, the tension broke, replaced by a mix of disbelief and hilarity. The scene was too absurd to be real, and yet here it was. Earth had found its defense in the most unexpected of places. The narrator's voice emphasized the irony. The mighty Zorgans, conquerors of worlds, had been reduced to clumsy, struggling creatures, simply because they couldn't stand the force of Earth's gravity. It was a defense no one could have anticipated, not the Zorgans, and certainly not the humans. And yet here it was, turning the tide of what could have been Earth's greatest catastrophe. The stage was set. Earth's gravity had become its greatest weapon, and the Zorgan Empire was about to learn that some battles can't be fought with technology or brute strength. Sometimes, the most unexpected forces hold the most power. The Zorgans, after their initial humiliation, weren't ready to give up. Determined to prove their superiority, they regrouped quickly. Their commanders barked orders in their native tongue, their frustration evident, and the Zorgan engineers scrambled to find a solution. These weren't just any soldiers. They were from the most advanced empire in the galaxy. They had conquered countless worlds, each one a stepping stone in their quest for domination. But Earth had caught them off guard. Gravity was never a factor on other planets, but here, it was their biggest obstacle. Zorgan engineers worked feverishly, activating their backup plan. Exosuits, high-tech pieces of gear designed for extreme planetary conditions, were deployed. These suits were supposed to compensate for heavy gravity, to enhance mobility in the most hostile environments. At first, the suits seemed to work. The Zorgan soldiers, once struggling to stand, now began to move more freely. Their limbs were no longer shaking, and they stood tall, marching forward with a new sense of purpose. The narrator explained that the Zorgans weren't to be underestimated. Technologically, they were far beyond Earth. Their knowledge of engineering, physics, and biology had allowed them to conquer worlds with ease. They had prepared for everything, at least they thought they had. With their exosuits activated, the Zorgans seemed to have the upper hand once again. But as the saying goes, pride comes before the fall. The suits were not prepared for the peculiarities of Earth's environment. Earth wasn't just any planet, it had shifting gravitational forces, microgravitational shifts caused by the rotation, the moon's influence, and even the varied density of the Earth's surface. All of this created subtle but significant fluctuations in how gravity operated in real time. The Zorgans, despite their technological prowess, hadn't accounted for the small details. It didn't take long for the malfunctions to start. One by one, the exosuits began to falter. What had been designed as a perfect defense turned into a nightmare. The suits, instead of helping them move, now worked against them. Microchips overheated, sensors failed to process the gravitational data correctly, and soon, the suits became more of a hindrance than a help. Zorgan soldiers stumbled once more, their movements becoming even more erratic than before. One soldier, towering and menacing in his armor, took a step forward, only for his suit to glitch. His left leg froze in place, while his right leg took another step, causing him to topple over like a tree being felled. The crowd of humans watching couldn't believe what they were seeing. The once mighty invaders were collapsing again, this time because their own technology was betraying them. The narrator explained that Earth's gravity wasn't just a force to be reckoned with, it was a living, breathing adversary. It pushed back against the advanced suits, making their every step a challenge. The Zorgans had underestimated the complexity of something as basic as gravity. They were advanced, yes, but all their technology meant nothing in the face of a force that had shaped Earth's landscape for billions of years. On the ground, the reaction was swift. Humanity, which had initially been gripped with fear, was now watching the invasion with a mix of disbelief and amusement. News outlets picked up on the spectacle, with reporters turning the once terrifying invasion into a comedic event. Headlines like, "Aliens versus Gravity! Who will win?" splashed across television screens, and viral videos of Zorgan soldiers tumbling clumsily onto the streets spread like wildfire on social media. Memes began to circulate, with humans poking fun at their would-be conquerors. Videos of the Zorgans flailing and struggling were set to ridiculous music, and internet commentators had a field day with their failures. The narrative shifted from one of terror to one of hilarity, as humans realized these aliens weren't the unstoppable force they'd once feared. Sarah, Tom, and Mike, still watching from their coffee shop, couldn't stop laughing. "We've survived alien invasions, not through weapons or diplomacy, but because they literally can't handle our gravity," Sarah remarked, shaking her head in disbelief. Even news anchors got in on the joke, reporting the situation like it was a live sports event. "And there goes another Zorgan, down for the count," one reporter joked, as footage of a soldier face planting in the middle of Times Square played in the background. The tension that had gripped the world was quickly being replaced by a growing confidence. Earth, it seemed, might just survive this invasion without firing a single shot. But the Zorgan commanders were not laughing. Desperate to regain control, they initiated their next phase, an aerial assault. Their ships, hovering menacingly above the city, began to descend. The Zorgans believed that if they couldn't fight on the ground, they would simply destroy humanity from the air. But once again, they had underestimated Earth's natural defenses. As the ships descended lower, Earth's gravity began to work its magic again. The massive Zorgan ships, built to operate in the vacuum of space, were not designed for prolonged exposure to a gravitational pull this strong. The lower they flew, the harder it became to maintain altitude. Soon, even the ships were wobbling, struggling to stay afloat in the sky. The narrator's voice highlighted the growing irony. This was supposed to be an easy victory for the Zorgans. They had invaded countless worlds, toppling entire civilizations with ease. But here on Earth, they were becoming a galactic laughingstock. A planet they had deemed primitive and insignificant was humiliating them without lifting a finger. Their once mighty invasion force was now a comedy of errors. The ships, unable to withstand Earth's pull, were being dragged closer and closer to the ground. The Zorgans, for all their advanced technology and planning, had fallen victim to the simplest, most fundamental force on Earth. The narrator left the audience with a sense of building anticipation. The Zorgans, clearly outmatched not by humanity's strength, but by nature itself, were on the brink of defeat. Yet, this was only the beginning. Earth, with all its unpredictability and quirks, was about to teach the galaxy's greatest empire a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Realizing that brute force wasn't working, the Zorgans huddled in their command center, facing a dilemma they had never encountered before. They had always relied on their advanced weaponry and sheer numbers to overwhelm their enemies, but Earth's gravity had reduced them to a laughingstock. Their attempts to march, let alone conquer, had been thwarted at every turn. The Zorgan commanders, determined to salvage their pride, decided it was time to change tactics. Instead of relying on brute strength, they shifted to psychological warfare. Zorgan warships broadcast messages across Earth's skies, demanding humanity's surrender. They warned that if Earth's population didn't comply, they would vaporize entire cities. The messages echoed through every television, radio, and device, presenting a vision of doom. But their threats didn't have the desired effect. As the broadcasts played, it became painfully obvious that the Zorgan commanders were struggling even to stand still in front of their cameras. Their demands for surrender came out slurred as they wobbled back and forth, unable to remain steady in Earth's crushing gravity. One commander, in the middle of his grand threat, toppled out of frame, and the camera cut awkwardly to static. What was supposed to instill fear instead provoked laughter. Humans didn't see terrifying conquerors. They saw a bunch of aliens who couldn't even stand upright. Social media exploded with memes of the Zorgan broadcasts, and hashtags like #GravityGotM trended worldwide. The aliens' threats were turned into viral videos, and their inability to cope with Earth's gravity became the punchline in countless jokes. Sarah, Tom, and Mike, witnessing this ridiculous turn of events, realized something important. The aliens weren't just technologically vulnerable, they were also mentally unprepared for the resilience of Earth's population. Watching the invaders flounder while trying to appear intimidating gave them an idea. Why wait for the Zorgans to make another move? Why not push them further? Determined to strike back in their own way, Sarah, Tom, and Mike gathered a small group of civilians and devised a plan. They used the aliens' arrogance against them, setting up fake surrender locations in strategic spots across the city. These areas were marked with bright signs and lights, seemingly ready for human captives to gather. When the Zorgans sent their troops to these areas to collect the supposed surrendering humans, they found only traps waiting for them. The teams had rigged each location with elements that maximized Earth's gravitational forces. Pits designed to make the ground even heavier, sudden shifts in terrain, and natural obstacles made it impossible for the aliens to maintain their already shaky balance. Zorgan soldiers would arrive, only to find themselves toppling over again, tumbling into the traps, and crawling desperately to escape. Their advanced weaponry and exosuits were no match for Earth's relentless gravity, which seemed to conspire against their every movement. Meanwhile, humans watched from a distance, laughing at the absurdity of the situation. The commanders of the Zorgan fleet were now utterly confused. How could this be happening? On every other planet they'd invaded, resistance had crumbled within days, but here, on Earth, a backwater world, their forces were being made a mockery of. Their troops, their technology, nothing was working. Earth's gravity had become their worst nightmare. Zorgan leadership descended into chaos. They tried to regain control by opening negotiations, hoping to salvage some dignity from the situation. However, even their attempts at diplomacy were disastrous. Every time a commander attempted to stand before the human leaders and negotiate, they stumbled, tripped, or fell, turning what should have been a serious diplomatic meeting into a farce. One particularly memorable moment occurred when a Zorgan ambassador, trying to make a grand statement of peace, lost his footing and ended up sprawled on the floor in front of the Earth delegates. The humans stifled laughter while the ambassador awkwardly tried to right himself, his arms flailing like a newborn deer. Negotiations collapsed almost as soon as they started. It wasn't just the physical challenges that frustrated the Zorgans, it was the humiliation. They had never encountered a planet that fought back in such an intangible, yet powerful, way. Their advanced minds couldn't fathom why Earth, a planet they had dismissed as insignificant, was proving to be such a formidable opponent. In a final, desperate attempt to regain control, the Zorgan leaders decided to use one of their most powerful technologies, an anti-gravity weapon. If gravity was Earth's greatest strength, they would simply remove it from the equation. The weapon, capable of neutralizing gravitational forces, was deployed in a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the invasion. At first, it seemed to work. Zorgan soldiers, previously struggling to move under Earth's gravity, began to float freely, their movements no longer hindered by the crushing weight. For a brief moment, it looked like the Zorgans had finally outsmarted Earth. They floated above the city, confident that victory was within reach. But then, as quickly as things seemed to improve for them, everything went horribly wrong. The anti-gravity device malfunctioned, sending their soldiers and ships into chaos. Instead of neutralizing gravity in a controlled manner, it made them float uncontrollably. Zorgan soldiers who had just begun to regain their balance were now tumbling through the air, unable to control their movements. The weapon had backfired, turning the battlefield into a scene of pure pandemonium. Zorgans flailed helplessly, some spinning wildly, others floating into buildings or colliding with one another. Their once imposing invasion force now resembled a group of ragdolls being tossed about by an invisible hand. Earth's gravity, the very thing they had tried to defeat, had become their undoing once again. The Zorgans were defeated, not by human weapons or strategy, but by their inability to contend with a force so basic that humans had long taken it for granted. The irony of the situation was lost on no one. As the aliens floated away in disgrace, the humans below couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and amusement. The invasion had been anything but conventional, but somehow, Earth had prevailed. The narrator teased the next phase of the story, where the aftermath of the failed invasion would unfold, hinting that Earth's unlikely victory was just the beginning of a much larger galactic adventure. After facing endless humiliation on Earth, the Zorgan Empire had no choice but to retreat. The once proud conquerors, who had toppled civilizations with ease, now found themselves fleeing a planet they had vastly underestimated. Their ships, which had been symbols of their dominance, struggled to rise above Earth's atmosphere, still impacted by the very gravity they had failed to overcome. What began as a routine invasion for the Zorgans had turned into their greatest failure. Earth, a small planet with primitive technology, had become their undoing. It wasn't Earth's weapons or advanced strategies that had defeated them. It was something as simple and unrelenting as gravity. A natural force, invisible but powerful, had driven them away, leaving their once feared empire shaken to its core. The narrator underscored the deep irony. One of the most technologically advanced forces in the galaxy had been beaten not by superior intelligence or weaponry, but by a force they couldn't even comprehend. As the last of the Zorgan ships disappeared into the skies, humanity stood still for a moment, unsure if it was truly over. When it became clear that the aliens were gone for good, celebrations erupted all over the world. The fear that had gripped nations gave way to an outpouring of relief, laughter, and amazement. But unlike the victory parties that followed human wars, this celebration had a quieter, more reflective tone. Earth hadn't needed armies or missiles to win. Instead, it had shown resilience through nature itself. Sarah, Tom, and Mike, who had witnessed the entire fiasco from their coffee shop, reflected on the bizarre chain of events. "So let me get this straight," Tom said with a grin. "We just beat the most powerful alien force in the galaxy, with gravity." Mike leaned back, sipping his coffee. "Yep. And they didn't even know what hit them." Sarah smirked, shaking her head in disbelief. "It's like the universe's greatest inside joke. We didn't need to do anything except exist." Across the globe, people were beginning to realize just how lucky they had been. The Zorgans, for all their advanced weaponry and military prowess, had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the very environment they sought to conquer. Earth's gravity, a constant that humans had long adapted to without a second thought, had become the planet's greatest weapon. People marveled at the idea that something as mundane as gravity could save them from total annihilation. But the victory wasn't just about the Zorgans' failure. Humanity had united in the face of what should have been an overwhelming threat. No one nation had stood alone. The invasion had shown the world that, when pushed to the brink, humans could come together, even if the solution was beyond anyone's control. The shared experience left Earth stronger and more unified, with a newfound appreciation for the small forces that shaped life. Meanwhile, word of Earth's unexpected triumph spread rapidly across the galaxy. It wasn't long before other alien species began to take notice. Earth, once considered insignificant, was now seen as a planet not to be trifled with. The stories that circulated were almost unbelievable. A planet where even walking was a challenge for the unprepared, where gravity itself became an unbeatable adversary. The phrase, "indestructible Earth," began to circulate among interstellar communities, painting a picture of a planet where survival wasn't just about technology or intelligence, but about adapting to an environment that could crush even the strongest invaders. The Zorgans returned to their homeworld, bruised both physically and emotionally. Their reputation as unstoppable conquerors had been tarnished, not by a superior military force, but by their inability to understand the simplest of natural forces. As they licked their wounds, the Zorgan leadership was forced to confront a harsh reality. Raw strength and advanced technology were not enough. Sometimes it was the overlooked details, the things they had deemed irrelevant, that could determine the outcome of an entire campaign. The Zorgans, once dismissive of Earth, now carried a deep respect for the humans. They realized that Earth was more than a primitive rock in space. It was a planet that had adapted to its own harsh conditions, and those adaptations had made humanity tougher than they appeared. It was a lesson that would resonate across the stars. Brute force wasn't everything. Sometimes, the environment could be the strongest enemy. Other alien civilizations began to view Earth not as a target, but as a place to study. In the aftermath of the invasion, species from distant galaxies expressed interest in learning how humans thrived in such a challenging environment. Instead of invasion fleets, Earth began receiving diplomatic missions and scientific expeditions. The planet that had once been overlooked was now a point of fascination, a place where even the smallest forces could become the most powerful. In the quiet that followed the chaos, the narrator reflected on the deeper meaning behind these events. Earth's unlikely victory wasn't just about gravity defeating the Zorgons. It was a story of resilience, of how humanity had thrived on a planet that constantly pushed against them. From surviving harsh winters to enduring crushing gravity, humans had evolved to adapt, to persist, and to find strength in the forces they couldn't control. The lesson, as the narrator explained, was simple yet profound. Sometimes, the most powerful forces in life are the ones we take for granted, the things that seem ordinary or insignificant but shape our very existence. Gravity, in its quiet, relentless way, had saved Earth. And in doing so, it had reminded humanity of its greatest strength, the ability to endure, to adapt, and to turn even the simplest of forces into powerful allies. As the story came to a close, the audience was left with a final thought. In a universe filled with advanced civilizations, massive starships, and complex technologies, it was the simple, everyday forces, like gravity, that could become the ultimate defense. Earth's triumph wasn't just a victory over the Zorgons. It was a testament to the power of resilience and adaptation in the face of overwhelming odds.